so true. So how long is the tour of the Cabot house? Do we have time to see
do
some rooms?
Sure. Yeah, I can show you around.
Okay, that'd be great. So we're going to take a tour.
We'll start in front.
Okay.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Hello.
So when was this house built?
1781.
Oh, wow.
So this is the front hall.
Okay.
The house has stayed pretty close to its original character because there have only been two families that lived here. First were the Cabot family, and later on in the 1840s, a family called Edward and Harriet Burley. He bought it as a wedding gift for her. And so the Cabots moved in here when it was new. They lived here about 20 years. Then they sold the house to the Beverly Bank, and this became the home of the first bank here in Beverly, starting in 1802.
Wow.
And then the bank sold it to the Burleys, and then the Burleys willed it to the Beverly Historical Society in 1892.
Wow.
So Beverly City Hall is also a Cabot mansion, but it doesn't look anything like a Federalist period or a Georgian period house, except sort of on the outside a little bit. But inside it's been totally altered. But this one has stayed very close to its original.
So what period is this house?
It's considered a late Georgian mansion.
A late Georgian mansion.
Right.
Okay.
And it was built during the Revolutionary War.
Okay. Wonderful.
The Cabots were merchants, and this room, you can see, put some more light on here. I don't know how much you can see. But this is their formal parlor, and this is all hand-carved woodwork.
Wow.
The tiles around the fireplace came from Holland. We don't have any pictures of the Cabots. None have survived.
Oh, I see windmills.
Yeah, those were made in Holland, probably during the Revolutionary War.
Amazing. It's beautiful. That is so beautiful.
It is a beautiful room.
It is. It's amazing.
So there were people, artisans, who were making things. These folks had a lot of money, and they were making things and having things made for them and imported. That's a card table.
A card table?
It's a card table, yeah. It
is that music?
That's a music box.
A music box.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
This is was made in Salem for the gentleman whose portrait is over the piano over there. And the piano was made in Boston for his wife.
Beautiful piano.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
A short keyboard.
Okay, so so these are not the Cabots.
No,
that's
Moses Brown.
Captain Moses Brown.
And that's his wife, Mary Bridge Brown.
Mary Bridge Brown. Interesting. Okay.
So, go into this is an exhibit. When the Cabots lived here, this was two separate rooms. This was the family parlor, like we would have we call a family room, but this was been the family parlor.
Yes.
And over on that side of the room was a breakfast and a room, and the kitchen is in the door beyond there, straight through. But after the Cabots sold the house to the Beverly Bank, this became the bank room. And that's a portrait of Israel Thorndike, whom I mentioned. He and Moses Brown were business partners, and he was the first president of the bank.
Ah.
And what they did was take down the wall between the breakfast room and the family parlor, and they used, these are masts from a sailing ship. They were big on recycle.
Masts, really?
To hold up the ceiling.
Wow.
So those are masts.
Wow.
So we have vaults in this room because in the banking years.
Where is the vault?
I'll show you. This is one in the floor.
Oh, really? That's a vault?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever. Oh my God!
So that's where they kept the gold.
Gold.
They had to keep gold to cover They printed their own. Each bank printed their own money. We didn't have Federalist money at that period.
Wow.
Each bank printed its own, so we had Beverly Bank money. So they printed the money, and they had to have coins to cover the paper they issued.
That is incredible.
And this is the day vault. This was a vault that was added in about 1840. So this is another vault. We use this one today. We don't use that one because it's kind of mildewed, but this one we use for paper. We have no gold anymore. Anybody wants to send us any money, we really appreciate it.
Okay, that is incredible. That is incredible. I don't think I've ever seen a bank this old.
We didn't. This was one of the earliest ones, and actually this bank survived as Beverly National Bank until 2009. It was one of the last surviving of the early American banks. It was taken over first by Danvers Bank and then by People's United. So they took over the assets of Beverly Bank. So this lasted a long time.
Wow, gold scales.
So you could bring gold in here to the bank when it was a bank. And this is not real gold.
Well, it would not be sitting there.
No. And you would, weigh it, and then you could get bank notes for it.
Wow, that is incredible.
And they were making their money by merchant ships going all over the world. They went to India and China, the Caribbean, Europe, trading fish, dried cod. We had fishing fleets here in Beverly, and they would take the dried cod to various places, and then they would trade it for rum. They made rum here. Traded it for wine. Sorry, they made a lot of rum. Rum was an important commodity, but they would trade it for iron. They would trade it for in ports all over the world. They went to Russia. We did an exhibit a few years ago. It's actually still upstairs. We had an intern go through all of our records because we have many, many maritime records. The Beverly ships sailed to more than 200 ports worldwide. Wow. It was a really important part of the economy here until the harbor was a little too small for the bigger ships, and the trade really shifted to the Boston ships. Salem hung on a little bit longer. We shared a customs house with Salem.
Really?
But, eventually, of course, the age of sail was over and the economy changed and Beverly became a manufacturing town. But these guys were making their money through sailing ships, going to different ports in the world and trading.
That is fascinating.
I'll show you upstairs.
Okay. George Washington?
That was painted by, that's a copy of a famous portrait that's actually in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And it was painted by the daughter of the original painter. Jane Stewart, Gilbert Stewart's daughter. She made her living copying her father's work. The painting in the MFA is really fabulous. It's huge.
I'll have to go see it.
Oh, it's a wonderful painting. This is a painting of a man named Joshua Fisher, who was a local doctor, and he was also a physician on a privateer ship during the Revolution. Beverly had a lot of privateers, which were
interesting. Okay.
Light in here.
Oh, what is that?
So this is an exhibit on maritime trade.
Fish flakes? What are those? I never heard of fish flakes.
Okay, so this is a flake, this rack.
Oh, the rack is a flake.
The rack is called a flake. And what they would do is the fishing fleets would go out 2 times a year, usually in the spring and the fall. They'd be out for 4 months or so, and they would salt the fish because there was no refrigeration. To preserve it, they would salt it, and then they would bring it to the nearest port. And Beverly had these racks, these flakes, all around along the waterways, along the Bass River and along the coast.
Yes.
And they would take this fish, that was salted fish, and they would put it out on a rack to dry. And that was so the process was a double process. And then they would put it in barrels, the salted dried fish, to preserve it. And they sold it. It was. They called it the sacred cod because it was so important to the economy. There were fishing fleets in all of the coastal communities. I think on top of the Boston State House is a codfish, and that's because it was so important to the economy. So it would go to, there were 3 primary markets. One was Europe, Catholic Europe, because they couldn't eat they could only eat fish on Fridays and on fast days.
Yes.
They couldn't eat meat. So salt cod is still actually popular in places like Portugal and Spain. And then the second market was here at home. And these were still Protestants, and they didn't want to get mixed up with the Catholics, the Papists, as they called them, not very respectfully. And so their day of eating fish was Saturday, not Friday, because they didn't want anybody to think that they were Catholics. And the third market was the slaves, and they had different grades. So the biggest pieces of fish went to Europe. Yes. The second one were sold here at home, because dried cod is very brittle. It just falls apart. And the bits and pieces were sold to the Caribbean for the slaves that were growing sugar, because they didn't want to waste land growing food for them. So they sold, the New Englanders sold salt cod to the slave owners in the Caribbean.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So this is some of the fishing things and whaling things in our collection.
Okay. So were there enslaved Africans who participated in the fishing and whaling here, or?
I don't know during the days of slavery. I do know that there were African Americans who were served on the vessels after slavery was abolished.
Okay.
So I know one man, his name was Caesar Russell, who had 4 or 5 daughters and a wife here in Beverly, and he was a cook. We have some records. He was a cook on this ship that sailed to Italy. And this is fishing stuff in here.
Okay.
So they caught their cod with those, just with the hooks. And I don't know about I don't have much information on our whaling fleet other than how long it lasted. These are all.
How long?
Into the 1850s was the last whaling fleet that left Beverly.
1850s. Okay.
Yeah. So let me turn some more lights on.
Okay. Wow. This is fascinating. You guys have any questions? Female Seamen's Friends Society.
Well, it was a dangerous way to make a living. So everybody would chip in a certain amount of money in case they died at sea or became disabled. So it was basically a kind of insurance.
Yes.
And they also provided Bibles for the sailors, and because they were always hoping to keep them from getting too naughty when they were out away from home. But it was primarily a way to try to provide for their families in case something happened to them. And a lot of men died. It was a dangerous way to make a living.
Yes.
So these are objects from our collection. This is it's a backstaff to try to find your way at sea. These are for untying knots. This is a marlin spike made out of metal, and this thing's called a fid. So when you untie knots, you need something to help loosen the knot, and that's what those were for. Because of course the sails were held up with rope.
So those are all the places that
And those are a lot of them, not anywhere near all, but yeah.
Wow.
Along with photographs of the harbors.
Oh, goodness.
This is a ship's log. We have several hundred ship's logs in our collection.
Yes.
This one goes along with this painting. This painting was of a ship called the Alexander Hodgkin, which was 8 days out of Beverly, heading towards Sumatra. And the Sumatra was the pepper trade. And the pepper trade, when the Americans were able to get involved with it after the war was over and the British were no longer able to tell us where we could go and what we could trade in, pepper was so valuable that the first ship from this area, it was actually a Salem ship, the captain made 700% profit. 700% profit for the owners of the vessel.
Wow. So
these guys hit, according to the ship's log, a storm 8 days out of Beverly. It was the worst storm that Captain Lovett, that was the man who was the captain of the ship. He'd been at sea for 20 years at that point. He'd never seen a storm like it. And if you look, you can see all the masts have been broken.
Oh.
And there's a man hanging off the bowsprit. And the rigging is all tangled.
Wow.
So they fixed it because there was no way to get help.
Yes.
So they had the materials at hand. They fixed the ship and they kept going. It could take 18 months to get to Sumatra, and another 8. They would be gone for years, and probably not very many of them had any way of sending letters home. Sometimes they were able to, but more often they probably just were gone. And in fact, that man I mentioned earlier, Robert Rantoul, his father, who was a sea captain in the late 18th century, sailed off one day and was never heard of again, he or his ship. They probably had a bad storm and went down. And leaving his mother, Robert Rantoul's mother, with 2 children, and she was pregnant with a 3rd.
Oh, wow.
And this is actually one of my areas of interest, is how did these women manage?
Yeah.
I mean, they did have family, but they took in sewing, they took in boarders if they had a house. Life was a lot harder in some ways for everyone than it is today for us. We have a lot more ease than they did.
Yes.
So this section over here is about military things, so naval stuff.
Okay.
And these are some of the objects in the collection. This is called a clapper. So to get the attention of the men, we used to have these things when I was a girl, where you would swing it and it would make a noise.
Yes.
This was to get the men's attention.
Wow.
There was a cutlass. Piracy was a problem, of course.
Wow.
So you had to be armed.
It's a compass.
But also because we had wars, and those are posters from Revolutionary War uniforms and the War of 1812 uniforms. So this guy is a privateer over here. His name was Hugh Hill. And Hugh is, we all enjoy talking about Hugh. He was born in Ireland, Northern Ireland, a place called Carrickfergus. He came here as a young man, probably in his teens,
Yes.
late teens, and he did not like the English, and he jumped right into the Revolutionary War. He became a very successful privateer captain. He sailed largely for the Cabots, and privateering was not piracy. They sailed for the government, and they sailed for themselves, and it was regulated. They had to buy a license, basically. And then if they captured an English ship, everything was divided. Through the owners of the ship, the captain, and the crew all would get a cut. Mm-hmm. And it actually kept the war going. One of the Beverly captains, whose name was John Manley, captured a British ship that was carrying munitions, cannon, gunpowder, all that kind of stuff, that then the government got that. We had a mule train or something like that took all of those munitions into Cambridge, where Washington's army was. Mm-hmm. And it kept the army supplied with those military stores for, someone said 9 months. So it was really important trade. And but if the other things that they found on board, and the ship itself, was they were auctioned off, and it became a way to keep the economy going as well as the war effort. These objects all belong to Hugh Hill, who was a great big strapping guy, about 6 feet 4 inches tall.
Wow.
These are buckles that he would have worn on his, his knee breeches, his velvet knee breeches.
Oh, okay.
They had beautiful clothes back in the 18th century, men and women.
Yeah.
And this was his spyglass.
Oh.
It's enormous.
Yes, it is.
This is his sea chest.
Wow. Wow.
And that case is for the navigational instrument.
Oh, for the...
That's right, octant. It was a way of finding your way on the sea.
Okay. This is really interesting.
But they had harsh justice. Those are handcuffs and leg irons. If you misbehaved when you were in the Navy, you could get into a lot of trouble.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
You had to do your duty.
Yeah.
So this is called a swivel gun. Everybody always thinks it's a telescope or something, but it's actually a small caliber weapon.
It is.
It is, and so they, with a firing pin, and they would have shot large round balls, lead balls.
Oh,
this is
kind of like a cannon.
Yes, only small. This is from the War of 1812 period.
That's from the War of 1812.
Approximately,
Amazing,
yes.
Amazing. Okay.
So I don't know, you any other questions?
No, I think it's quite interesting. Everything is it's very, very interesting.
This room was a bedroom at one time.
Okay.
With the Cabots and the Burleys lived here.
Okay.
And it's now an exhibit on the American Revolution. So we're sort of just stepped back in time a little bit. This is a copy of the Declaration of Independence.
Really?
The state of Massachusetts required that all of their citizens know why we were going to war in 1776. So this was printed in Salem and was probably read at the churches. We had 2 churches at that time, first and second parish churches, and so that everybody would know that we had good reason to go to war against Great Britain. And Beverly was very much in favor of it. They did not want to remain part of Great Britain. Not all communities and not all people felt that way.
Yes.
These paintings around the wall were actually done about 100 years ago for a book called The Story of the Revolution. And that's a painting of Paul Revere rousing the natives that the British were coming.
Okay.
Beverly was attacked briefly in October of 1775, and that cannonball is a part of that.
Oh, okay.
Came from that battle. That's a 9-pounder.
Wow.
That was shot from a British ship called the Nautilus. The American ship, the Hannah, was one of the first vessels that was commissioned by George Washington. She was a fishing schooner out of Beverly, owned by a Marbleheader and crewed by Marblehead men.
Okay.
But her home birth was Beverly. And so there's all been this back and forth thing about where is the birthplace of the American Navy, and the answer is not here. This was George Washington's Navy.
George Washington's Navy.
He knew he had to have a naval presence, and so he asked John Glover, who owned the Hannah, to convert his fishing vessel. She was a very small little thing. You can see she only had 4 cannons, very little,
yes.
To convert her by putting cannons and swivel guns on her, and to try to stop the British from supplying their soldiers that were occupying Boston in 1775.
Wow.
So the Nautilus Hannah was causing a lot of problems, and the British captain on the Nautilus chased her right here into Beverly and started firing on her. The captain of the Hannah beached her at Independence Park, which is just down the street here, and then continued firing back and forth. They also started firing at the church, the First Parish Church, the actual building that's still there. And that's where this cannonball came from this action. And it's considered one of the first naval actions of the Revolutionary War. And it scared the devil out of all of the coastal towns, and they begged Washington, who was in Cambridge, to please send them munitions. And so Beverly had 5 places where they put cannons, and there's still one that has survived. Not the cannon, but the bank that they would put the cannons behind has survived at Hospital Point. All the rest of them have been dismantled. But that one still survived. And it was because you can imagine your town gets fired on, it's pretty scary.
Yes.
So these are behind you, in that case, are all weapons that were, in some cases we know who the people were who carried those weapons. And in some cases, they are just weapons that we know were made during that period. So some were made in England, some were made in France, Germany, Netherlands, and so on. One here on the end was made in the United States, well, in America.
Wow.
So our friend Moses Brown that we saw in one of the rooms downstairs, that portrait of him,
yes.
This was his presentation sword.
Oh.
He participated in that famous battle in December of 1776. Americans weren't doing too well to that point, and we attacked Trenton, New Jersey. You know that famous portrait of Washington standing on the men who were rowing him across were Glover's regiment. They were a regiment from Essex County. They were Marbleheaders, Beverly, Manchester men, and they are the guys in that painting who were rowing Washington across the river to attack Trenton. And Moses Brown was part of that action, and he was presented that sword in memory of it because it was such an important battle. More for the morale builder. It built morale for the Americans because they weren't doing too well up to that point.
Okay. That's fascinating, fascinating. Okay, so this is Valley Forge.
That's right, and as I said earlier, that's where Jethro Thistle died in Valley Forge.
Yes.
And the reason they died was because the government did not provide for them, the men who were stationed there with Washington. If in that portrait you can see that painting, again that was done about 100 years ago for a book, but you can see that he has no boots, his feet are wrapped in rags.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have enough, they were intense, it was an intensely cold winter, and they didn't have enough food, and the government just wasn't taking care of them.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
So these are some of the documents relating to privateering. And the 14th Regiment was stationed here at Beverly under John Glover from Marblehead. And this was regimental orders, so they would get orders out of Cambridge from Washington. And the orderly would write the orders in a book. And this is actually a copy, but we have the original here. They're very rare in collections.
So is there any information about Billy Lee that accompanied Washington?
I don't know much about him, other than he was his manservant.
Yeah. And he went, and it said he fought with him for like 20 years
He
or
was
something.
with him for, a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know a whole lot about him myself.
Yeah.
These are, again, more documents on privateering and how the money was divided up when they sold these things. It took a long time. From the time a ship was captured, that's what you see in these watercolors. Are an artist's idea of naval battles during the American Revolution.
Okay.
So, you would take an extra large crew, the captain would, and if they were able to capture a vessel, they would then put the crew on the vessel and sail it to the nearest port, and then it would be divided and sold at auction. But it could take months before all of this happened. And of course, you were just as likely to get captured by a British ship. And they threw them into these terrible prison hulk ships.
Wow.
Or to put them in prison in England in pretty bad conditions, and a lot of sailors died. We may have treated the British captives badly too, but some of the evidence indicates that they were given paroles if they stayed within a town. We know that some of them were taken to Newburyport, for instance, and if they promised not to leave the premises of the town, they were allowed to walk around, and they were taken care of. So I'm sure there were instances where the British were not treated well too, but
yes,
the British treated our sailors kind of the way we treat terrorists.
Oh, wow.
That's how they felt about us.
Yes.
They were not pleased with us trying to break up the empire.
No, I could understand that.
This is a medicine chest belonging to that doctor that we looked at his portrait when we were coming up the stairs.
Okay.
And he was he was captured by the British actually, but when he was as a privateer surgeon, that he escaped, made his way across England and to France, and got back home, and picked up his practice eventually, and he lived here till he was in his 80s. He's buried here in Beverly.
Oh,
and
wow.
when he died, they said that he did not like bloodletting. He didn't like bloodletting, which was considered good medicine in the 18th century, but he used medicine to good effect. So this was his medicine chest. And there's actually more bottles that go along with it, but they are in storage right now.
Okay. Wow, this is fascinating. All right. Concord Bridge.
Yeah, that was the original 19th of April of 75, which was considered the beginning of the American Revolution.
Okay.
That's actually one of my favorite paintings of this man whose name was Frederick Coffey Yawn. And he didn't use much color because these were reproduced in black and white, so there wasn't much point. But you can see a little bit, I'm not sure how it will reproduce for your viewers, but there's a little bit of red here. This is the redcoats.
Oh, yes.
And the redcoats thought the Americans were big cowards because we fought behind the fences and trees. And the reason for that was the redcoats were very well trained. They were a professional army, and our guys were militia. They weren't professional. They trained. Every town had. Beverly had 3 militia groups, and the Minutemen were just a piece of that. Everyone knows about the Minutemen.
Yes.
But it took a lot of skill to fire one of those muskets that we looked at, and firing them. If you were really good at it, you could fire 3 to 4 rounds per minute. Think about the difference between today. 3 to 4 rounds per minute compared to hundreds of rounds per minute. And that was if you were well trained, because these were musket loader things that you had to, muzzle loaders, sorry, that you had to load from the top, and there's quite a process to it. So it took time.
Yes.
And very often you had to get up close and personal and fight with the bayonets, which are the knives at the top there.
Okay.
So we fought the way it was safest for our men, fought the way it was safest for us. And I say men because it was pretty much a man's job. Not too many women were involved except in trying to support the men from home as best that they could and to keep things going.
Yes.
There were some really bad times. We had a smallpox epidemic that happened during the same period, and
Oh, wow.
there was very little money. The fishing fleets were just ruined. Nobody was going out to sea for that. So it was hard times.
Yes. Yes. Well, it's normally what war does.
That's
destroy, right?
That's right.
So,
But fortunately, they were able to rebuild, so
yes.
from their sacrifice.
Okay. And who is this portrait of?
That's Lucy Larcom. She's the one I mentioned. So she's a descendant of the Larcom family, not a direct descendant of David and Mary Larcom, but they would have been her great aunt and uncle.
Okay.
And she wrote about Junio's family.
Ah,
She was a poet.
fantastic.
She was a poet and a prose writer and a teacher. She's a really interesting woman.
Okay. Are the slave quarters open?
No.
No?
And
Okay.
we never, as far as we know, we didn't have slaves in this building.
Okay.
But the servant rooms would have been on the third floor? The third floor, I guess.
Okay.
But they're storage and they're not open to the public.
Okay. All righty. Well, I will follow you down.
All right.
Oh, did I look at this one? Ranul? You mentioned
I mentioned him because he was this
Rantoul.
Rantoul. Yeah.
Rantoul.
Robert Rantoul, born in Salem and then moved to Beverly when he was a young man, and he was an apothecary, started a pharmacy.
Okay.
And then he became an attorney, and he was on the school committee, and he was on the Overseers of the Poor, that group that took care of the poor folks in town, and
Yes.
he was involved in everything. And he was a very
thank you.
progressive man. His son became a U.S. Senator.
Yes.
He actually also served in the Massachusetts legislature. And his son was poised to become a leader of the anti-slavery groups in the Senate. And he tragically died very soon after he took office. But Rantoul and his family were very much anti-slavery and did what they could to try to change that. He died before the Civil War, but his daughter became very involved in taking care of the soldiers through a group called the Sanitary Commission that was started by Abraham Lincoln. And there were women primarily, but men too, to some extent, who collected supplies and sent them to the Union Army. So the Rantouls were a very activist family.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, do you have a card or anything with emails?
Sure.
I want to So as I leave, I just want to do the outside so they
Okay.
can see the front of the museum. And so I appreciate you guys for sharing and inviting. Hi, how are you? So we have been with Terri McFadden, and this is the Beverly. It was interesting, and you'll watch the replay. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining. So we so appreciate the Beverly Historical Society Museum and Terri for their time. Have any last words?
Well, I hope some of you will come and visit us sometime. We love having folks visit either for tours or for doing research, learning more about Beverly history and American history in general.
And what is the address?
117 Cabot Street, Beverly, Mass.
Okay. They say hi, Terri.
This is
Okay,
strange.
okay.
Hello, everyone.
I know. So thank you so much.
You're
I do
welcome.
appreciate it.
Thanks
I'm
for
gonna
coming
leave it
by,
on.
Janice.
Oh, no problem.
I'll have to show you out. That's quite,
Yes,
quite
yes,
a
yes.
difficult door lock.
Oh, okay. All right. Uh-oh.
Did you have a bag?
No, everything is in my pockets. I'm a pocket person.
That's a good idea.
Janice, I found the record of the first slave birth in Beverly.
You did?
Marriage, I should say.
Slave marriage?
in
Really?
And it's
What
kind of
year was that?
interesting. Robin Mingo, slave to Thomas Woodbury, and Deborah Taylor, Indian woman, were after legal publishment and Deborah's promise before me to live with her said husband, master and mistress, as long as her husband Mingo lived, and then to be dismissed with only 2 suits of apparel suitable for such a person, whereupon Thomas Woodbury did consent and agree to their said marriage, and so they were joined together June 20, 1707.
1707. Amazing. Thank you. Oh, wow. That is fascinating. Wow. Thank you so much for this. I'm trying to get it to focus.
Nothing easy on that.
May I keep this?
Oh, yes.
Oh, thank you so much, Ed. Thank you so much, Terri. Can you guys stand together just real quick?
Sure.
Just, yes. So we'll have this. And introduce yourselves again.
Terri McFadden. I'm on the staff here at Beverly Historical Society, and this is Ed Brown, who's one of our most valued volunteers. He's a local historian, too.
Okay. And they say thank you so much. This has been very, very informative. That is awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, Janice.
Oh, thank you. And I'm going to email you the link.
That's great.
Infamous triple lock.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I
Made in
see.
England in the
They
1840s.
say thank you, Ed and Terri. Okay, so I'm going
Thanks
to
for
give.
coming.
Okay, you're welcome. So I'm going to give you guys a shot of the outside. And there's the sign. And this is the front of the Cabot house. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the tour. And there it is, John Cabot House, Visitor Center, Beverly Historical Society, Essex National Heritage Area. And thank you guys so much for joining. I appreciate